Hello.
You're right there, buddy.
Okay.
I'm trying to see how I can share what I want to. Let's see. Maybe I can do that. Okay. You're right there, gang. Okay. Well, I see everything except the apparition that says it's David's iPad. Maybe that's just him and that little green glow off to the right-hand side.
I think he shifted into another dimension.
Well, yeah, but he said he'd be here. Maybe that's how he meant he'd be here. All right, I'm going to give him just a couple more minutes, and I know that there are a couple other people that are trying to find their way in. For future reference, the Zoom credentials for Thursdays are always going to be the same. I set it up as a repetitive through the end of the year. So if you forget what they are, they're on that Thursday podcast page on my website. And if you participate on Sundays, that has another one. But again, those credentials are on that page and they'll be the same through the end of the year as well. So that once you've been here, you kind of understand the program.
Great.
So while we're waiting for just a couple more minutes, we'll start this at really 4:05. I understand, Steve, you and David have been having some interesting conversations.
Yeah, I think every conversation with David is interesting.
Yeah. Well, now you know what it was like the first evening I got to spend some time with him. And he's an interesting guy with a lot of things to share. And he hasn't really, he's been around that academia crowd now for a while. he's got plenty of friends at SpaceX and NASA that when they realized what it is and whatever mathematical gift he's been given, he has now been running in their circles. So I know that he wants to have these conversations with like the rest of us and not maybe at that level. So he's delighted when we get to participate in things like this. We've been talking about how to lay this out moving forward. And one of the things he and I both agreed on is now, as we want to build this knowledge information a little bit at a time, that it's clearer than that we need to talk about that whole idea of thoughts become things. And so maybe that'll be next Thursday. Dave wants to participate in that one. We've had a couple other people who have had access to higher dimensions, and they certainly are aware of that perspective. And yet, when you see some of their collateral and their materials and what they've been, pushing out over social media, it doesn't tell me that they're looking at things and trying to explain them from that perspective. That some of the words that they use are just charged. And you know what that does. I'm sure that innocently, it wasn't their intention to put that out there. But nonetheless, when there's one in particular that comes to mind, and it's somebody that Dave and I interviewed with, and I think a lot of this guy, and he's made it his mission to help try and educate people as to, kind of the history of, a galactic phenomenon. But when he pushes some of his stuff out there and you see war in big letters in the promo, it just charges me in a different way. And so I'm reluctant to get involved in the content because, look, you've already dropped my vibration a little bit by suggesting that this is the content. And it gets hard to watch it. I don't know how we're going to delicately have that conversation with him, because we all have had this conversation with him before. And during the interview, we even referred back to how we understand that what we put out there is what we get back in abundance from the universe. And so when we put out those kind of energies, and when that's where we spend our attention, that's definitely what we're going to get back. So I don't know that it was intentional. And it certainly comes from a good place. And never mind that he's put lots of effort into this content. So far, there are 4 episodes, and what Dave told me is there's 10 total. Well, I don't know that I'll be plugging into seeing the rest of them, but nonetheless, I digress. I'm not going to pay much attention to the chat boxes, only because I have an idea what we're going to do today, and we're just going to fire up moving forward. So we decided we're going to build the same foundation of information that helped my little 3D brain come to terms with all the things that I've come to understand. And one of the first places I start, the first place I start was that topic that we're going to save till next Thursday. It would be that thoughts become things. And actually, when that really came back to me in a fashion where I can understand what that was trying to tell me, it referred to a story that I found on another website that explained Einstein's perception of it all. And that in order for something to actually exist, it has to be perceived by an observer. Well, when you start to really digest that, now you understand how when you focus on it, it becomes a thing. Your thoughts become things. And then when that matures into something that you can really apply to yourself and understand greater, now the rest of the world opens up for you too. So that was where I began. Then when that sunk in order for me to really understand what was taking place, I had to understand a combination of cosmology, and so how the solar system has influence on us, Because in order to understand this light that I'm trying to describe to the rest of you and what I've been exposed to, that and that stuff that we carry inside of us, where'd that come from? Well, right now, today is the day that we're going to go back to that place where I began with that too. So I'm gonna share a page. I put this on my website because there's a lot more content to it. And even when I went back to review it today, I went, oh man, there's more to that than I thought there was going to be. So it's not just looking at the chart and trying for me to describe it to you. There's more content behind it that I forgot, just kind of underscored all of the content that I got to read that day. So let me pull this up again here. Where'd you go? I just had you there. Let me see if I can get to. Can you all see what I'm putting up on the screen?
Yes. Your website. Anyway.
It's taking a moment to load the page here. Hold on. There we go. Okay. This is what helped me kind of put into perspective where we were going. And when I was aware of the concept of the shift, and where lots of people concluded that 2012, around that winter solstice, was when this phenomenon everyone expected to take place. I could see how they came to that conclusion based on what I understand.
I think we've lost you, Lowell. There he is.
Sorry about that, guys. Can you all see me again? I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I got booted out. So I'm going to try and fire this up again. And I assume you can hear and see me.
Yep.
Sorry again. I don't know why I got booted out again, and I apologize. Sorry about that, guys. Let's try this once again. Bear with me for just a moment. Hi again. I'm going to try and go about this another way. Yeah, Zoom link vanished. I don't know if it was Dave or it was me. Anyway, I'm going to try and share this in another way and not go to the website. I think that there's another way that I can get the graphic that I want us to be able to see in another way. There we go. If you can see that on your screen, just give me a thumbs up or a heads up. There we go. Thanks. Well, that was my thumbs up. Can the rest of you see that graphic that's up on the screen?
No.
No?
Oh, there.
You can see what I'm sharing now? Perfect. Yep. Good, because now I can hear you too. Right. All right. Anyway, as I was describing this 2012 phenomenon that everybody was looking at, scientists, astrologists, they were looking at that date. And actually, when you see this illustration, this is an illustration of what's called the precession of the equinox. It's a 26-year cycle that our solar system makes around our central sun, Alcyon. So you see her in the middle of that, and those other blue orbits around her, those are the Pleiadians. So this photon belt that you see illustrated there that kind of looks like a donut is what we're passing through right now. It's elevated photon energy, enhanced photon energy that's being distributed out from everywhere that she distributes this energy coming from her. It took our solar system until 2016 to find itself entirely within this band now. So for the next 2,000 years, we're in this bath of enhanced photon energy that's a cyclical cosmic cycle. It's been described as the beginning of the age of Aquarius. Here's where we're going to be. It's responsible for humankind's rise in consciousness through this additional photon energy that's coming in. I wish I had the web pages up so that we could kind of review the text through it as well. And I invite you. Yeah, I saw you back, Dave. Dave, it looks like Dave's trying to get back in. So his iPad is in. There's more information behind it. And what I got out of the article that I found wasn't just this information, but the fact that scientists and astrologers agreed with this information was finally where I could get science to help me understand the things that I was trying to comprehend. Because if we're going to understand this entire phenomenon we're going through and enrich the spiritual side of ourselves that we've been ignoring for a long time, we have to understand science, we have to understand cosmology, and then we have to just let the spiritual side of ourselves open up and just address what it is that it needs nourishment from. This was one of those first places. So when I could understand where that photon energy that was coming from and how it affected us, it just spawned my interest now to understand more about the energy that comes from the sun. Really, all of this kicked in about 2 years ago, and that's when I started to pay attention to as much space weather as I could find. There are really wonderful resources. If you are not aware of a YouTube channel called Suspicious Observers, that's the first place I would tell you to look. It's run by a guy named Ben Davidson, who is an astrophysicist and has lots of experience in academia as well, written many books on the subject about the sun's influence on us and what's been happening for a while. And when you listen to Ben describe it, it just helps put things into perspective. So now while we're watching this phenomenon And if you've been paying attention to the solar energy that's been coming our way, you know that, especially last week, there's a couple of different solar phenomena that comes our way. What I was referring to last week is when a solar flare emits from the sun and heads off into space, it would be a random thing for it to come in the direction of Earth. And so when you understand in here that we had an M1 category flare come in our direction, it's a very rare thing. It was even rarer when there was a second one right behind it. Now, that's one type. And solar flares and that kind of information, in the distance it takes to get from the sun to Earth, that's a 3-day trip, as opposed to when you look at the sun and you see these dark masses, those are coronal holes. And from there, there's always a constant solar wind that emits out of that all the time. Well, when that's pointed in our direction, we also get photon energy that comes. Not the same type of energy in the same scale as we get when it's a flare that's coming our direction. That takes more like 3 days to reach us. So there's plenty of notice when we see that that's been snapped off. There's enough satellite information that we have access to where we can kind of expect to see that. But there's very little information we get about when flares snap off the way that they do. We find out about them after the fact. And there's also a spot on the NOAA website, the National Organization of Aeronautics and Astronomy, I believe. Anyway, there's a whole section under that for space weather enthusiasts. And there'll be different models and different angstrom videos from satellites that have been positioned in the atmosphere that help NASA and the government just kind of keep track of what's going on in the sun. Most of that information is shared with us, although over the time that I've watched it, there are certainly periods where that's gone dark. It's reasonable to think that these satellites, when they're out there affected by the same kind of solar exchange that we're subjected to, that they would also have trouble dealing with that as well. But somehow they've survived. One of the two that have been out there for a while, there's two out there that we know as Stereo A and Stereo B. Stereo A has been dead for a few years now, and it's not expected to come back. So right now, there are two satellites that kind of look at the sun and report back that information. And that resource at NOAA is a good place to be able to review it. So when you take that in consideration, and those of you that are familiar with the Schumann resonance also gives us kind of a meter for phenomenon that's coming at Earth. Back when the German physicist Dr. Schumann came up with this idea that Earth has a vibration that is hers, and every sentient being that's on her vibrates at that same level, it was determined that that was 7.83 hertz. Over the last decade or so, the average that has been when it's been monitored and researched, and there are two places, there's one in Italy and there's one in Russia that monitors this and tracks it and reports it on their own websites. That's been more in the area of 11 to 14 as an average. It's been said that once Earth's vibration reaches 40 hertz, that's what will snap her into her next dimension. That average that I just referred to between like 11 and 14 is an average all day. That doesn't address the spikes that we've been seeing. Most days, that spikes up beyond 14 or so. I've seen reports. I used to look at it every day. I don't look at it quite as often because I look more at the solar phenomenon that's coming. And that's where I get my answers. But I see when it's remarked on in some of the groups that I follow, I've seen it spike into the 30s. I've seen it spike into the 60s. And I've seen it spike into the 90s. So if you don't think that what's coming from the sun isn't affecting us in some way, here's the evidence that it is. That vibration at that level is enhanced by the fact that this magnetic field that's been around Earth has been deteriorating for a while. I would recommend the Suspicious Observers site I was telling you about to go back, and there's excellent information on understanding what all that phenomenon means. And Ben was great to help me kind of put it all into perspective. I know this was going somewhere. If somebody has any comment, your mics are live. Go ahead and chime in. Welcome back, Dave. I saw you had to dump your iPad, but it looks like it's still connected.
Well, my iPad's on the fritz. I'm going to get a new one. I'm using my phone. Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Well,
hey, Steve.
Hi.
Is that you, Patricia?
Hey, it's Patricia.
there we go.
Welcome back. How was your trip to Disney with the child?
I'm still here. I just popped on the call tonight. I'm in Daytona.
Woohoo!
So I'm trying to figure out where the heck I left off. The deterioration of the magnetic field. When it's been pointed out, and I'm sure that the news has kind of suggested along the way that our magnetic poles have shifted. And if you see those illustrations, you see where they used to be, because magnetic north is not the top North Pole where we would think it was, and the South Pole isn't where it's supposed to be. When you see the illustrations of how it's moved and where it's moved, now you begin to understand when they suggest that we're ripe for a pole flip. Now, what does that mean? It means that Earth has flipped on her poles many times in the past. They have suggested that's a 700-year cycle when it happens, and it's been over 700 years since it's happened last. So according to that information, we're ripe for this to happen again. It certainly would make sense that with that amount of electromagnetic energy that's coming our way from the sun, that one day soon it's going to break through that magnetic field that has been protecting Earth all this time. And that's the day that I think you can count on this solar phenomenon taking place. Now, how that translates into, how we see it and how we live after that when the poles shift, because clearly Minnesota is no longer going to be where Minnesota used to be. And you can say that about anywhere other than probably the areas along the equator, but I'm curious to see what that settlement how that's going to work out. And if you resonate with any of that, anybody have any of their own perspectives on any of that information?
Well, yeah, I resonate. The polls have been at least on an excursion, right? An accelerating one for the last 100 years or something. And the sun, is in an interesting cycle. The last cycle was very few sunspots, and sunspots tend to drive our magnetosphere. And so we have a combination of a deep magnetosphere and traveling poles, with some anomalies forming in other places on the Earth, right? That could be our future poles. Tough to say. I mean, it does. We could have an excursion and it could go back. So this is a little bit of an unknown, right?
Right.
But at a 700-year cycle, I don't know. But at a big cycle, this happens. So at a big cycle, poles flip. It's in the earth. I mean, we can look at charges in material that's in the earth and we can see that they flip. So this isn't like a conspiracy theory. The poles flip. They're moving at an incredible rate compared to what we were told they would. And that data tends to be occluded, which is always a sign that, probably we would like to see that data, but it's always like lagging, and when you see it is finally it's gone quite a bit further than you thought it would, right? But I think that Ben's site, the Space Weather News, is a beautiful place for the amateur to go and kind of see what's going on. It's also a place where you can see the in-little spiral is what you were talking about, where you can see the CMEs coming from the sun, which can go in any direction, of course, but you can kind of tell from the orientation with the in-little spiral, you can see a prediction of if it's going to hit Earth or not. So personally, I worked in that industry for a long time. So my company made space qualified hardware for satellites. That's what I did for 15 years. So I can tell you, you were talking about the satellites also will be affected. So the satellites tend to be well shielded to a degree. Okay, so they shield for radiation, and it's called hardening. So you harden components through shielding primarily, so that they'll survive these kind of events to a degree. Of course, there's a limit, but to a degree. And they can also turn off the satellites. So some of this we can see coming, as you said, even hours in advance, we see what's coming. So there are very smart people at these agencies who want to keep their satellites active. So we may keep satellites active. Satellites may be the least of our problems, right? The grid itself is a giant antenna that unfortunately couples in very well with some of these kind of frequencies. And the last time it happened in a big way, we were just coming into wired technology. They were called telegraphs. So we were just putting up telegraph poles and telegraph wires, and we were just putting up these long metal strands that could be acting as antennas to couple into this energy that was hitting the Earth. And this time was in the 1800s, and it's called the Carrington event. Okay, so at the Carrington event, we had a large flare, and it burned up telegraph equipment, and it was a major event. If it
wasn't it true that operators that were connected to it were jolted when that event happened through those lines?
Yeah. And the problem is today we're not working with hard contact mechanical telegraph equipment, right? We're working with extremely fragile electronic equipment. It's all in our houses. It's running all of this. Even if the satellite's working, it's got to go through uplinks and downlinks, and it's got to be processed on the ground. And even our very electricity is not, they're working on it. I think they're starting to take it seriously as they see this stuff evolve. But right now we're very vulnerable, I think. Big equipment, just plain old high power transmission equipment has long lead times, really long lead times. Some of this equipment could have like a year lead time. And that's for if you need to replace a reasonable amount of equipment. If you need to replace the grid for whatever part of the world happens to be pointing at the sun when that gets here, it may be decades, before just the equipment could be replaced, if everything else was operating, right? So these are the big picture concerns with this. This is a minor event. I'm talking about Carrington event, right? So
Yes.
you can get beyond this. You can get to something called a solar flash event. Like this is when the sun resets in the big cycle, a bigger cycle. And I can't say that's 26,000 years, but it's a longer cycle for sure, but it happens, right? So Dave can talk about this, but the sun builds up material on its surface, right? And then periodically, we're talking the surface of the sun launches. And when this happens, this is quite an energetic event and could blow, all the oceans to the other side of the earth, things like this. This is perhaps the Noah myth, right? This is a big event. And all over the earth, there are lots of caves that I would suggest have been used periodically over a long period of time for just such survival events. So there has been someone who has periodically warned us in advance, I would guess, to prepare and dig some deep holes and hunker down and go to high spots and stuff like that.
If there's anything you believe about the Lemurians, you just described how they prepared when that phenomenon happened back when Lemuria fell.
Yeah. And this could have been contributions to the sinkings, right? To Atlantis going down and these kind of things. They could have been happening on these kind of cycles when.
It makes me wonder whether what I knew about Lemuria and when they fell, was that really because of a phenomenon other than just some kind of cosmic cyclical thing like that? There was a few other things I wanted to point out that made me kind of understand more about the sun's influence on us. When I was young, there were opportunities in northern Minnesota, and now I understand that's rare to actually see aurora borealis. And how somebody explained that to me was, oh yeah, that's the sun reflecting off, the polar caps. Well, now I know better. And that, when that solar phenomenon strikes the earth and it hits our magnetic field, that electromagnetic pulse heads for one of the poles. It normally hits the North Pole first, wraps around, and then hits the South Pole. But now that charge has got to go somewhere. So it goes to the core of the earth. And so, in my opinion, here's what explains this: the tsunamis that we experience and the volcanic activities that we experience are measures of that solar influence that we're getting and that magnetic pulse. They hit the core, and all of a sudden that energy has got to be released somewhere.
So
I attribute that to
the aurora was just visible all the way down to North Carolina.
Yes. See how extensive it's getting? I was going to mention that while we've been on this call, I got notice, because I got an app that indicates when there's solar energy. There was just an M-class flare that fired off while we've been talking.
Yeah. So M-class flares are not that rare. They're pretty common.
Right.
Even X-class flares are pretty common. What combination is happening that changes everything is our shield is dropping. So
yes,
as the magnetosphere drops and pulls in, you're going to be seeing these auroras coming down farther and farther, right? But also what used to be a minor event could become not a minor event, right? As there's less shell to protect us from that incoming energy, right? So that's
agreed.
It's a combination of things that we're heading into. Now, this cycle is tough to tell yet. The last cycle was extremely weird, like quite anomalous, back to quite a ways as far as the low number of spots and things that went on. So you've got a lot of different things going on. Like, they're very active is one thing, and very inactive is actually another problem that eventually can lead to an issue too. So whenever the sun starts moving out of these, normal bands of
Mhm.
probabilities, then you start getting into things that we really don't have tons of information. And I don't know that we're moving into that yet, okay? But the pole movement has bothered me for 10 years. And I've been watching it pretty closely for at least that long. And I think it's enough to be concerned about that that's something that is a very real reset potential for us that could really screw up a lot of plans.
If I was to continue to think, which there's a lot of people, Ben Davidson is included in that. He certainly talked about what the results of these phenomena are going to be. He calls them catastrophic events.
Yeah.
And if I was to sit in my 3D, suit here, that would certainly be what it's going to be. But
Yeah.
I attribute whatever this phenomenon that's coming, that's going to trigger whatever is going to happen, is going to boost us into the next level of consciousness. And we'll be in New Earth. We won't be left here to figure out how we pick up the pieces when the entire electrical grid is gone.
It could be the cover story, right? So it could be
Yes.
the cover story that, I've seen a great separation that's coming. I just saw it in a vision years ago that the Earth was literally splitting in two. And at that time, a certain group was going one way, a certain group was going another way, and that's just the way it was. So a great cover story for that is a lot of souls check out due to something that happens, right?
Yes.
So that's certainly one possibility. The guy that did the whole series of films for Ben, I think it was the Die Hold Foundation, maybe, or something like that. But if people are really interested in catastrophism and understanding the big picture, the big slosh that's possible, then those films are pretty interesting. To me personally, I don't want to focus on that. So
Thank you.
There was a time period when I really
thank you. Thank you.
Okay. There was a time period when I did focus on this. So when I first woke up and started combine that with what I saw going on with the sun, of course, it was 2012. You could go to the movie theater and watch what was going to happen to us, right? So I was sure that was where this was going. However, what I feel now is not my story. So I'm not saying it can't happen. I'm not saying that it's not legitimate science. I'm just saying I don't want to put a lot of energy into that. So these things are possible. Excuse my dogs. These things are possible, but we can choose where to throw our consciousness and throw our energy. And right now, for me, sorry, I have a guardian dog like 10 feet behind me, so he's guarding our sheep. So for me now, this is just, it's not high on my radar anymore. And I don't know if I should probably stop talking is what my dog's saying.
Well, I'm going to ask Dave to chime in because he always has something valuable. But I'm going
to mute until my
what you were talking about right there, Steve, is going to lead into what Dave and I want to talk about next week and where we spend our attention and where we want our intent to go. If we focus on those things, we should expect them in return, and we just need to be mindful of that. So
this
Dave,
is manifesting, right? This is manifesting 101.
Exactly right. Go ahead, take it away, Dave.
Before I say anything, I'd be interested to hear what Patricia's observation is, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
Patricia, can you step in and sort of...
Sure. Actually, I kind of knew that this conversation was going to happen before it happened, in regards to New Earth and regards to Some of I'm not, this is actually great for me because I have no scientific background. I have the spiritual knowledge, absolutely no scientific background, which this is brilliant for me, and it's very helpful. So when Steve was starting to talk about the vision that he had of the new earth splitting off, I've heard of it, and it's always something that I kind of question in the scientific realm, right? Because there's a few things that, and it's also like we said, we can manifest anything collectively or independently, right?
Thank you. Yes.
So keeping those intentions out. So we currently have an entire population and masses waking at this time, coming into awareness of either a new earth concept, higher consciousness concept. And I guess for me, my question would be the scientific end of that, the probability of it, to where is it the frequency of the earth, if we raise them collectively in the vibrational patterns, does that collectively raise us into that consciousness, into a new earth, or could the earth actually split off into another earth? It's something that I've always had a question about, so I would be very interested to hear any scientific perspective of that.
Steve?
I think that was for you, Dave.
I was muted. So, okay, from a scientific standpoint, so higher dimensions are definitely part of science right now. So we don't completely understand how they work, but we know they're there. Okay, they're the only explanation right now that carries us into a workable theory of how our world works. So we know higher dimensions are there. Do we know that what I saw is going to happen? Absolutely not. I don't think you're going to find a physicist that hangs with that unless if they're awake also, right? What I saw was a new earth that had completely different geography and completely different colors. It was completely different in every form of the word, completely different. Now, if you could be a fourth density person right now, or fifth density, and you looked and we could see you, we would only see a 3D shadow of you. Okay, we could only see what fell into our space, what fell into our dimension that we could conceive of, because we just can't. There's no fourth dimension right now for us with our sensory package. Okay, but for you, it would be like me looking at a 2D piece of paper, right? I can see 2D. I can see all of 2D. 2D can't see all of 3D me. If you know, this is kind of like string theory. We see things dropping through, but there's actually many multidimensional pieces to it that's coming and going, and now it's a this particle and now it's a that particle kind of thing. So multidimensional is very okay. Well, this is not my field, by the way. This, I don't even know how I slipped into this, but multidimensional stuff is very much in line with science. The concept of a 4D Earth that we cannot currently see, but is there, perhaps completely co-located with us, that we are literally part of at a 3D level, is completely in line with science. How we move forward into one of those two spheres that I saw, this is when now we get into the spiritual realm only right now, where we start beginning to understand how our consciousness works and how we're raising it and how we resonate with things or don't resonate with things, and how we can only experience things that we're resonating with. So to me, it's a combination right now of my spiritual experiences, and they don't, to me, conflict with what I understand as science. In fact, I always say, I just believe science doesn't understand what I'm currently experiencing spiritually, but one day it will. So it's not that my spiritual experience is wrong. It's that right now science is working with a limited set of equations that hasn't yet incorporated consciousness into it.
That's really well said. Thank you.
Yeah, to me, consciousness, Dave and I were talking earlier, talking meaning I was just listening to Dave's text, Dave's text and going, I don't know. But anyway, we were talking earlier, and really, I think that the current science is a really close but no cigar thing. And I think that what's missing is consciousness. And I think that one day we will do that. I believe one day physics will be able to test, literally test, experience, or at least theoretically concept how this works back to very close to the very, 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 very beginning of where it came in. It's not mutually exclusive.
No, it's not mutually exclusive. It can't be. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I agree like 90% with Steve for sure. Science, physics will explain a lot of these things. That's why I've been saying that when we find the next ladder, which leads us to the next step or phase of higher mathematics. See, the problem right now in physics that I know Steve sees this too, because we were talking about quantum stuff earlier. Oh, and by the way, you know, Lowell refers to me as Data Dump Dave. So when I open up,
I said that once.
that's all it took.
It's catchy.
Yeah, Data Dump Dave.
Need a t-shirt.
So if string theory were accurate, if string theory existed, then the Fibonacci sequence wouldn't, you see, because a rose petal would stretch out infinitely and never curl up and spiral. You'd never see that bud. String theory, unfortunately, follows an eternal path from the 0th point of its conception into infinity, and it has to. And so when you're in a linear dimension, which string theory is, it's really linearity. You have to not look straight ahead, but you have to look to the up, down, to the right, and to the left, to the other strings next to you. And so if that was the case, while we're traveling through the timeline and existing within a string or a harmonic reality, then you would have to find your wormhole to your left, right, above you, or below you, not in front of you. And then you would have some sort of gateway or some causality to open up a interdimensional pathway to the next string. So let's put string theory aside and let's put things like dark matter aside and think about whole group causality and whole group determinism. When we look at reality from a third dimensional point of view, we can definitely guarantee, I believe, from what I know, we can definitely guarantee physicality in the fourth dimension. I also have been privy to a view or a vision of the Earth splitting in two. And it's no surprise that we're talking about that, Steve. It's actually a little spooky. You and I have been hitting on a lot of synchronicities lately.
Yeah.
What I saw was this Earth, this dimension that you and I and Lowell and Patricia live in, moving forward and leaving an old Earth behind. And this is the causality that I'm trying to describe in which you transfer dimensions. It's almost like when you're in a desert and you see a mirage and you see those heat waves, it's almost like passing through a wave, like sort of a inconceivable vapor or a barrier. And once the Earth passes through this barrier, it strips an alarming amount of frequencies and people that generate those frequencies from the passageway. And so the Earth and the previous frequencies, which finally got us to the point of making this transition, will be left behind. This is sort of the woe, I think, sort of the separation pang, because we don't want to use words like pain and convolution and destruction. We know that moving forward into the next dimension will be something that's beautiful for all people and animals, and it'll be beautiful for the planet. The people that are left behind, unfortunately, will have to work it out, and perhaps again, through the repetition of time and through the cyclical nature of time, perhaps then the world that is left behind will reharmonize and re-resonate and again go forward. And by that time, this world that we've moved into the fourth dimension will be moving into the fifth. So it'll be a constant continuance of moving forward. This is part of the evolutionary process of having a species with one soul. And the day will come when we all feel the same way. We all have the same amount of love. We all have the same amount of compassion. And we all have the same amount of higher intellect, because that's the genetic sort of, it's almost preordained, that sort of destiny for all of humanity and all other sentient species. Unfortunately, the Schumann resonance boxes, the one that, there's two, there's one in Sebastopol and there's another one in, I think it might be, I know Leningrad's been renamed, but the two that are in Russia, there's two boxes, and there's one in Italy too. There's one, I think it's in Tuscany. Those two Schumann resonant boxes are both broken. They've been badly damaged 10 years ago, and they haven't been fixed. So whatever Schumann resonance readings we're getting must be coming from Italy and not from the other hemisphere in Russia. And it's really important, because one of the things that Schumann wanted to do was to put 4 boxes on the planet. And he did quadratic mathematics. And he said that once all the signals could be read, that there would be a sort of a divine signal. And he only got so far. And I've looked as hard as I can to find the origin of these Schumann readings that are being made available to us. And I'm sorry, guys, I just can't find it. And I'm having a hard time with following the Schumann resonance. I think that there's some validity to it. And of course, that the Earth, just like human beings, just like dolphins and yeti and manatee and monkeys and bears, we all resonate a life vibration. And Gaia certainly has a very powerful one. So I resist quoting Schumann resonances only because I know that the 2 boxes in Russia are in really bad shape. And I think that what we probably ought to do is figure out how to download the diagram for the Schumann resonance, because it's a lot like a seismograph. It's a couple of wires that are run way down into the earth with 2 dipole copper ends that go down into a hole. And then they pick up an electrical piezoelectric current and they run that up the wire and it's registered somehow. We probably ought to look at that engineering, Steve, and maybe build a couple and stick one in North Carolina and one here in Southern California and see what we get. I know that the paperwork's out there and it's a big project to do that, but the tool itself, the device itself, is pretty simple. It probably cost you about $800 to build. And it's just digging the hole to drop.
I doubt the technology is very complicated. The size of the antenna may be.
Yeah, that's going to be a concern as well. That's
driving, right?
Right, because it not only goes
for an 8 hertz signal. There's a number of different ways you can do it, but they're all big.
right. For an 8 hertz signal, you're going to need a 50-foot high wire that's shaped like a V.
Yeah. I mean, it's going to be some, at least cost in copper is going to be,
it's cost prohibitive. So. And then there's the FCC and the FAA. Yeah,
well, at least it's just probably a receive, but I don't know. Maybe they bounce something. I don't know how it works. I haven't looked at it. So
the next observation I sort of had was that the natural cycle that's going to occur on the sun is not anything to be alarmed about, except that when Lowell was talking about, or you were talking about people surviving the event, because obviously we have, because you and I are here.
Right.
I always think about Darren Kuyu. Darren Kuyu in Turkey. There's this vast underground, vast underground complex. I mean, it has 5,000 rooms that they've explored, and they reckon there's another 30,000.
Right. Incredible.
And that had animal pens and watering troughs and very advanced air duct systems. So this is some place that some 40 or 50,000 people were able to escape to.
Right.
So, and if you look back 12,000 years, well, you're talking about, it's pre-Etruscan, pre-Etruria, pre-Philip of Macedon, pre-Anatolian. So this is, a very long time ago. This is before the the big dawn of civilization. So even then they knew to get the hell underground.
Right. Right.
Now, one of the things that, like, I've known Ben really well. We're friends, and his wife Kat has really helped Ben deal with me because Ben knows I'm astrophysics boy. And
I think he's like a pharmacy industry guy, isn't he, or something? Like
yeah,
a
Ben has
little
a
out of
couple.
his, huh?
Yeah, yes, but
Yeah.
Ben is very well versed, very well respected in a lot of academic circles. But there's a lot of people out there like Professor Dave, who is vehement against Ben because Ben says stuff that's contrary to the academia, the shit that you and I had to go through to get our degree. So, and I talk about Ben with some of my friends at SpaceX, and I put up suspicious observers a couple of times when we were talking about shielding, because shielding is, I got a friend who's really got some amazing stuff going down. Look, there's something that I've been discussing about all of this with my academic end, and I have a lot of friends at SpaceX and NASA, and I have 2 or 3 really good friends that are crypto over at JPL, and one of them is that they put me onto some really good work. First of all, Oxford University Press has released a book called Quantum Flux Tubes, FLUX, Quantum Flux Tubes. Now, quantum flux tube is an exchange mechanism of very highly charged plasma, both positively and negatively charged. And I know you know what Poiseuille flow is. Quantum flux tubes are those, when you look at the magnetosphere around the Earth and you see those lines, because it's always drawn as a diagram of lines, isn't it? Sort of like the lines of a globe, or, lateral and horizontal lines that go around the Earth. That's the magnetosphere. Well, those lines are actually what's known as quantum flux tubes. They're the exchange mechanism that both pull highly charged particles out of the ionosphere and replace them back into space, but they also are a conduit which keep the electromagnetism around the Earth. They're like a Faraday cage. Now, from what I know about our sun and what I now know about the Earth, because a long time ago I threw out that 1940s, 1950s model of the center of the Earth being a spinning nickel iron ball with nothing but magma around it. I just chucked that out entirely. And I know that there's a center structure to the Earth that's very crystalline, and it's also very, it's composed of very dense metallic surfaces and rare earth minerals, but it floats independently just under the crust. And one of the reasons you get things like olivine, and you get things like peridot and beautiful obsidians when lava comes out is because it's really liquid crystal, and it recrystallizes on the surface.
Yeah,
but it doesn't.
And diamonds, I think, are the only
Right.
two that come from that level. Yeah.
Right. Of course, you're going to get diamonds through kimberlite pipes. So those kimberlite structures are closest to the transitional layer. But really what I'm seeing and what some of my friends are realizing is that the center of the Earth is a bright light plasma with a very powerful piezoelectric charge that's continual. Now, that charge is sort of affected by the electromagnetic exchange of the quantum flux tubes. It's in a way protected by the crust of the planet, so that we always maintain a specific electrical plasma charge coming from the center of the Earth. One of the things that they're not talking about, that they won't talk about, is this. And this is a big bone of contention. It got me in a lot of trouble at Purdue. This was that the sun and the Earth both maintain a dipole-dipole electromagnetic relationship, and it's just common sense. So I know that there's been a lot of talk about the sun is going to have that, what I call an exoblast, and this is the complete, cervical release of the material that you and I know about. Whether that's iridium or carbon, I believe that it's liquid carbon that's highly compressed, and it's going to, come down to Earth in the form of hot ropes, big black ropes, and it's full of iridium. And if you look at the K2 boundary layer which happens to coincide with being 12,500 to 13,000 years old. That's evidence of that very sun layer coming down to the planet and layering on top of the surface of the Earth. The last one, like Betelgeuse, last time our sun did this, it laid a lot of material down on this planet. But because of the dipole-dipole relationship, when the sun is, and you're right, Steve, we had a very strange grand solar minimum. The last 11 years has been very curious. There's been very tiny spots, very little activity. And then over the last, 3 to 4 months, we've watched the sun wake up again.
Yeah.
And it really hasn't been until the last 2 months that we've seen it really so that we can say, yep, we're now entering grand solar maximum. Now, when the grand solar maximum occurs, the sun is also putting off highly charged particles, lots of plasma, lots of positively charged protons, lots of negatively charged ions. All kinds of really amazing plasmas are coming off the sun, and they're impacting the Earth's magnetosphere. When the sun goes into was that Willis? Was that Willis, Steve?
Willis actually passed away just a few weeks ago. This was Xana.
Oh.
This was our Doberman. Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, because Willis is our star traveler. So he's
right. That's right.
right.
Willis was a star traveler.
That's right. He got picked up. He got
real-
picked up and moved.
Real quick, I'm going to mute because my dogs are so active with deer right now. But if you look at the many cave paintings around the world, you'll find these odd looking, what we used to think were people and stuff, right? These little figures that are actually plasma, various stages of plasma between planets.
Right. They're
And
toroidal field
there was
diagrams.
There was a time when from the Earth, man like us from the last few tens of thousands of years witnessed in the sky what we're talking about coming. Okay. So it's something that has been survived, is crazy. It'll be wild. It'll be a wild ride for whoever's still here, kind of thing.
Mhm.
But it's not the end of humanity, okay, or anything.
Right.
Like that. So I'm
Right.
just gonna
Okay. So as long as you're there, thank you, everyone. Have another Zoom meeting. Bless you, Patricia. Thank you. Okay, Lowell. I guess it's just the three of us.
Thanks, pal. Well, we're a little over an hour in, so this is actually a good place to stop. And I appreciate. Thank you. The whole process for me, and I can see in Patricia's case today, where she's a little light on science. Here's where it kind of all comes together and helps. Now, when I could draw some dots between the things I was beginning to understand spiritually and I could find scientific support for it, then things really started to manifest in my mind a little bit better. So when you get an opportunity to help from that perspective, we might not be able to understand it all, but there's enough of the dots that we can connect so that we make sense of it. And that's what we're trying to get done here. Through these kind of efforts, here's how we kind of build that fundamental information for everybody else to understand the way that we came to understand it.
Well, I'm not that brainy, and I hope that my words are not so intense that you need to get a degree to listen to me. The thing I was trying to say is that what they don't talk about in mainstream academia in regards to the next Carrington event is that there's a dipole-dipole relationship. That means that since we've gone into grand solar maximum, the charge has increased. And what's going to happen? Well, even though our magnetosphere has been shrinking because we are traveling through the arm of our galactic arm into a new region of outer space, because of this relationship, the Earth's magnetosphere will actually swell and become emboldened by the amount of charge that's coming off the sun. And I have a sneaking suspicion that Mother Earth has a special umbrella made from positively charged ions that are going to deflect a lot of the damage that's going to happen. So I'm not really sure that it's going to be as horrible as we think. And I think that there's some surprises up Mother Nature's sleeve as far as the electromagnetosphere reawakening at just the right time.
Mhm.
So I think that,
that would make a lot of sense.
Right.
Because so much survived, right? All the animals and everything didn't run into a cave. So
Right.
many of fauna and flora survived way beyond these events many times. So how did that happen? That makes a lot of sense.
So I've done a lot of when you're in college and when you're in university, and you have a lot of workshops, and you have computer study class, and you also have your electromagnetic studies. And so every university professor who's crazy, there's always one. They always have a Van de Graaff generator, or they always have one of those fun things that from a Frankenstein movie set that goes, and you can study this stuff, and it's fascinating. But so there's a return charge, and I think part of the damage is going to be that we have these massive transformers in power stations and power hubs. Now, a power hub relays, capacitates, and pushes the charge forward. So let's take the Hoover Dam. Hoover Dam is going to have probably a quarter gigajoules worth of transformers between the Hoover Dam, Vegas, and San Francisco. Well, every one of those transformers is going to blow because they won't be able to capacitate the external charge quickly enough. Okay, so you're going to get these big bright blue plasma explosions, and all the lights are going to go out. Well, it's going to be 8 days at least for the charged particles to pass through and around the planet. So I know that we're going to have to do a lot of remanufacturing, and it'll take a couple of years to get back on our feet after the next Carrington event. It really will. Doesn't matter if it hits on the side of the planet where India is, because it'll still affect us. And anybody that builds satellites knows, I mean, Steve, you must have worked with pass filters. You know that those highly charged particles bounce between the Earth and the ionosphere, and they stay trapped on the planet. It just bounces right around the whole planet. So if the impact point is India, it's still going to blow out transformers in New York. Yeah, and so that's one of the things that we have to consider. But then if the Carrington event does prove to mankind that this is the next phase that we're moving into, then what does it teach us? It teaches us that we never should have gone down the rabbit hole with all the technology, because it really hasn't, it's been great for education, but that's about it. I'm looking at everything else, and, AI and the bomb and all these other terrible things that have come from technology. Maybe we should have horse and carriages. Maybe we should be riding and using incandescent bulbs again, because I'm not really convinced that technology is all that swell. It could be the next thing is to put us back 150 years, so that we remember what it's like to have values. We remember what it's like to grow our own vegetables and to take care of our sick neighbor.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. So when I studied this stuff for the first time 10 years ago, shortly afterwards, we bought horse-drawn plows, horse-drawn carriages. We've learned how to do everything with horses. We learned how to grow all our own food.
Oh,
we learned
God bless
a lot
you.
about power generation. We learned a lot about a bunch of stuff, right? So
that's awesome.
I bought a huge library because I will still have books. So I have a lot of a library about how to do things. And we learned how to make our own clothing. We grew sheep, learned how to weave again, learned how to spin again, right?
Sign me up.
Everything else. So in a way, here's my thought. One other scenario, right? We get this flash. Okay. I really dig your idea. It really makes a lot of sense to me that there's probably something else up Mother Nature's sleeve that gets us through this in a way that we don't understand yet. So we all make it through. But we are different. We are awake. Many of us this time are awake. So now, what if we didn't rebuild with technology, but we rebuilt with consciousness? So
Right.
a lot of things that we can do with technology, we can do with consciousness, right? We're just starting to understand that. We're just starting to learn that. What if the biggest gift we had was to get nudged in that direction, where we weren't raping the planet constantly to get this thing that we're so addicted to, but we had all the same benefits, and it allowed us to take off this crazy energetic filter that we're all buried in, and these other things that allow us to go like, it could be the best thing that ever happened to us. So that's why I just don't see it. I don't spend a lot of time on it. I don't dwell on it anymore. I stressed about it for several years, and then I was like,
up.
it is.
If I locked up, guys, okay, I can still hear Steve a little bit, so it sounds like I'm still here.
Yeah, you're
still there.
Maybe you're co-located. Maybe you're, but
he's bilocating.
He's bilocated. Yeah.
So absolutely. And when I opened my bakery, I'd spent 12 years teaching wine and food chemistry in Europe, and I went all over. I studied wheat growing and apple orchards, and I studied apples in Germany and grapes in the Rhone. I did all sorts of agricultural work. And when I was 14, my dad used to own quite a few acres in Hillsburg, California, and we grew grapes. So I know agriculture. And so when I opened a bakery, it was because I know how to grow wheat, I know how to thresh wheat, I know how to grind it, and I know how to make bread, and I know how to build the oven to do it. And if we have bread, then there's very little woe. So when you're plowing the field and you're making ceramic jugs, and your wife's making candles and making clothing with her class of ladies and other guys that want to learn weaving, I can be out threshing the wheat and baking the bread.
I have size, instead of weed eaters, I have size. And we have a stone grinder. Like we can do the whole thing, and she makes amazing bread. Like we can do amazing bread. So
hey, I got kicked off, but I want to say something, because Steve triggered something that I had heard a couple weeks ago, and had to do with this guy I had heard who was able to channel Lemurians, and this Australian filmmaker that's had some dialogue with him. He had 3 questions to ask him. The second question had to do with, he wanted to understand what kind of technologies that there was in Mount Shasta and Telos. And what they came back with was exactly what you were pointing out. And they said, when he wanted to know what their technologies was like, they said, you have to understand that without consciousness, there is no technology. That without consciousness, there's no creativity. And so now we can see it from that perspective, our technology comes from our consciousness. Steve just laid out exactly where we're going.
I hope so.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Well, before we get dumped off again, I figure out how I'm going to knit all these videos back together so I can put this back on the podcast. I'm going to check out today. We'll be back here next Thursday. If you're available on Sunday morning at 9, we'll be there then. But I'm looking forward to seeing you all again in an environment where my technology won't fail quite as much. So thanks for being here, guys. I'll see you again soon.
Okay.
Thanks, Lowell. Have a great night.
Okay. Thank you all.
Good night, everybody.